So our next guest speaker is Mr. Marco di Vetta. מרקו מגיע אלינו מהעיר פאדובה באיטליה, והוא יציג לנו באמת את התהליך שנעשה. I should speak to the mic, I'm sorry. putting it on. מרקו מגיע אלינו מאיטליה, והוא יציג לנו תהליך שעובר את העיר פאדובה בבנייה של אסטרטגיה לאדפטציה. העיר כבר נמצאת אחרי כמה שנים של עבודה על מיטיגציה, ובעצם ממשיכה לשלבים הבאים. מרקו שותף בחברת ייעוץ והנדסה מאוד גדולה באיטליה, שמתמחה בתחומים של אנרגיה, בטיחות בעבודה ואיכות סביבה, והוא עצמו מומחה למכשירים פיננסיים בתחום של סביבה, אקלים ואנרגיה. אז הרבה מאוד דברים שנוכל לשאול אותו, אולי אחר כך אם כך יהיה לו עוד כמה דקות להקדיש לנו, וכרגע נשמע ממנו על התהליך של פאדובה. מרקו, בבקשה. Please. Again. All right. Which one is it?
It's this one.
Pàdova, of course.
Yep.
All right. And you can use this. And it's not starting.
No. Oh.
There it is. All right. I think it's trying to open it again. All right.
All right. Well,
Building some
anyway,
function.
while it gets started, I'd like to thank for the introduction. As you understood, as I understood through the translator, you already know that I represent the municipality of Padova, but I work with Sogesca, which is an engineering and consultancy specialized in energy, environmental, and work safety issues. Today I would like to introduce you the work that the city of Padova is going through. It's going through an adaptation planning process, which is a long process. Unfortunately, the technicians of the municipality of Padova couldn't be here today. They didn't want to increase their carbon footprint, our technicians are, so they sent me. As you heard, I'm a specialist in financing tools for energy efficiency and renewable energies. So adaptation is not really my thing, but I will try to keep up with your expectations and also with the introduction that Mareike and Georgia have done to this very, very important topic, which is also very complicated. Technology doesn't like me. Anyway. Okay. What should I do? Oh, here it is.
Is that better now?
Maybe.
I think we should. You need to do that?
Yeah, then
Probably it's this.
This is the presentation that is a little bit heavy. Anyway, I'm not here by accident anyway, because Sogesca, the municipality of Padova, and ICLEI work together on a set of interesting actions and projects. So I can really substitute for the municipality here and also be ambassador for our territory. I would like to introduce to you the city's context a bit so that you know what I'm talking about, where we are, what we do. And then I would like to go through the adaptation planning process that the city of Padova just started, because it's not only a complicated thing, but in the Italian framework, adaptation planning is still not something very common, and so Padova is kind of a front runner in the country. And we are learning, and they are learning by doing, of course, and the support of and the cooperation with ICLEI is also very fruitful. Okay, so Padova, if you didn't know where it is, well, I mean, Italy, as maybe you know how it looks like. Padova is located in the northeastern part of the country, in a region called Veneto. The city capital of the region is Venice, which you might know. And as Marika mentioned, sea level rising is a problem that does not affect all the time everyday life. Well, in our capital city, that does affect everyday life, and quite often, in fact. So adaptation is a need, even though it's not really a consolidated process and approach. Padova is a medium-sized city, counts about 200,000 inhabitants, and a limited surface, and it's located in a very, very, very flat land. It's about 30 kilometers from the seaside, 12 meters above the sea level. This is just a map of the city, but just to show you that there is no big river running through it, just like unlike many other Italian cities, but it has a lot of waterways in it. It has a lot of interesting actions that come from the bottom, from civil society, and like a park that is located between the industrial area and the city center, which is something that is mandatory within the legal national framework. But in this case, this has become an opportunity to create a renewable energy park where school kids can go learn about technologies, and also companies go there and train in a context where they can actually understand what mitigation actions are and adaptation opportunities are. And also the industrial area is trying to increase their standards in order to show their effort in mitigation actions and also participate in the adaptation process. So as Marika mentioned earlier, mitigation is part of the process, and Padova started a few years ago with a Sustainable Energy Action Plan. It's basically a mitigation plan, and this is why it supported the local market for renewable energy and the local market for energy efficiency in private buildings. And so from the mitigation side, Padova is quite okay. I actually, until today, thought that it was reasonably sustainable as well, but as Giorgia mentioned, you need to get to a certain level of resiliency to be able to say that you are sustainable. So probably Padova is still in the process to get there. And of course, a lot to be done. It's an old city, was developed in the Middle Ages, then in the Renaissance, and so there is really a lot to do. It's not modern planning, modern urban planning, what we can see in Padova city center. So we really need to work on this, respecting the cultural heritage that we have, which is also a big part of our opportunities. So the adaptation process just started. Beginning of last year, the technical office, where the people that know the needs of the territory, besides, of course, local stakeholders, decided to put the mayor in a condition where he couldn't say, no, climate change does not exist. We need to do something about it. And therefore, they started a process. And since it's a new thing for us, and the national legal framework is not so strong, we had to go by the book. We had to follow theory. And
you have a book.
Yeah, we have some slides. And as you will see in the next slides, also the tools are not as fancy as theory is sometimes is. But anyway, we understood that there are two sides of the same coin. On one side, vulnerability to climate change. On the other side, there is resiliency, there is adaptability, there are opportunities given by changes. And so went by the book and looked at the impacts, the potential impacts, what can happen when climate change takes place, and it's taking place. And of course also understanding there will be residual impacts once we have adapted. And Well, I think that Georgia's slide earlier today was much nicer than this one, but I wanted to make clear that the city of Padova understood the fact that all the mitigation actions that have been taking place in the territory are part of the same cycle. It's, of course, not exactly where we are going, but still, something has been done. So there is climate change, there are impacts on human activities that need adaptation, and then, again, there is a need for adaptation to develop socioeconomic patterns that are, of course, contributing to emissions, and therefore we need mitigation actions in order to limit climate change. So it's a cycle. We looked at it, and the city and the environmental officer looked at the problem in this way. So we act within the framework of the European Commission. Padova has been selected as a pilot city where to. It hasn't been selected because it's already an adapted city, but to be part of a European process working with local authorities in developing adaptation plans. So we went again by the book, we followed the definition, and we considered adaptation as a set of actions taken in order to cope with the new conditions generated by climate change. And of course, we understood that adaptation needs a lot of activities, a lot of actors within the local authority and outside the local authority, and at all levels. Local level, regional level, national level. We need to involve the public authorities, the NGOs, the local stakeholders, the private stakeholders, and so on. Padova has a long tradition of local Agenda 21 approach that started a long time ago and keeps going. It never really stopped, and the process and the approach is used anytime there is a need for local planning. So, bad slide, but with a lot of information. But this is which kind of represents also the working group that the city created. It had to involve all offices with the environmental department in the middle, promoting this process, but then engaging everyone else. The infrastructure office, public buildings, maintenance, mobility, civil protection, etc., with, of course, political commitment on top, right there, and engaged whenever it's needed to give a little push. And as you can see, for further planning, the financial department, the social department, the cultural department, and human resources, maybe they should have involved them also from the very, very beginning, but still, it's step by step. And the first thing was an assessment of the impacts and of the vulnerabilities. It's kind of a matrix like the one that Marika showed from the Philippines. It includes the systems and also the risks. So the rising in temperatures, having warming winters, droughts, heat waves, increased rain, more intense and concentrated rainfall, which are things that we are actually experiencing at the moment, and then river runoff, flooding, etc., and also an extension of the growing season, which is also a fact. And these things, these risks, have a potential effect on the various sectors, like communication system and mobility, technological infrastructure, buildings, agriculture, forest, and tourism. We put this together because in our territory there is a connection between them, the natural environment, health, etc. So this was an initial step. Then the different offices, the working group, selected the systems that will be included in the future adaptation plan. The adaptation plan is not there. We're just going from a strategy to the planning. And we are in the process. And selected a set of systems that were considered to be relevant. And also, climate factors were analyzed, and these are the ones that we see the most in our territory. There is an increase in temperature. Winters are getting cooler, but still, we have droughts. And one of the main things at the moment are concentrated rainfall. So we have droughts, and then suddenly a lot of water. And we are on flatland, there are waterways, but there hasn't been an adaptation planning in the past few years, so we experience flooding quite often. Maybe not as big as you might see on television in some parts of Europe, but still, it's a fact. And if you have a house by the canal, which is not like a Venice canal, it's a canal, well, once a year you might have some extra work to do to fix your garage. So the city got organized, create this internal working group, engaging all the offices, but then also an external working group, actually an external group of actors that were engaged by the local authority. So the regional agency for environmental protection was involved, the Consorzio di Boni, that's the river basins management body at regional level. And then the local utility and another local utility, because they also manage resources and were provided good input. So the working group is meeting periodically, very often last year, and now it has already set an agenda to get to the adaptation plan, and we're expecting this process to last a few years, in fact. Then, again, from the organizational point of view, there was a collection of the planning tools that have a relevance on adaptation, with an indirect relevance, but because they're not integrated so well in order to be able to become immediately, directly an adaptation plan. But then, of course, civil protection plan, the city master plan, the metropolitan area master plan, and then the mitigation plan, the sustainable energy action plan, and of course all the data necessary. And then the main vulnerabilities were identified. Flooding, as I was mentioning, is in some areas of the city, flooding is a very serious problem. Then heat islands, we're experiencing heat islands. I mean, urban planning has been done some centuries ago. Therefore, there are areas with very, very little green areas. And then, of course, there is cultural heritage, which is directly connected with the fact that urban planning was done centuries ago, which represent a very important resource and needs to be preserved. But climate is making it harder and harder. And of course, the city has already started with some adaptation actions, which will be included, of course, in the adaptation plan, but already started independently. Heat islands, as I said, is one interesting topic for us, and the city council, city environmental office selected 4 pilot areas in which to implement some actions by the beginning of next year. And it's also starting to plan green and blue corridors. That means pathways along canals or linear parks in order to improve adaptive mobility, sustainable mobility. Mareike showed something about that, and because there is a need to increase permeable surfaces in order to cope with the heavy rainfalls. And And then the local Agenda 21 process has also been used and is being used to develop a new sustainable building code. And in the past year and a half, the local Agenda 21 group has met, involving a set of local stakeholders, and there's been a draft of a potential new building code, which includes some interesting measures, like energy saving standards, energy efficiency in new buildings, the production of renewable energy in new buildings and also in refurbished buildings. And then, again, the pushing on the impermeability of parking spaces, because that is a problem for us. And then also green roofs have been introduced a little bit, and that also following Marika's presentation on the interesting effects of green roofs. And then, of course, first step is emergency planning. And since floods are the main emergency that we are facing at the moment, there have been some actions taken in the past few years, like new pumping systems or underground pools to collect water. And there have been also some initial steps to work on the local waterways, the ones within the municipality, but also outside the municipality in the local authorities nearby. And that's why there is a need to work on the metropolitan area rather than just on the municipal area. But of course, these are actions that are not formally introduced in a planning tool. They're just emergency actions that have been taken after something bad has happened. So this is still, it's something good because it has improved our quality of life, but still it's not something comprehensive. And we're going through this adaptation planning process. The environmental office is very much engaged. The political side has been pushed, and now it's very important to have political support. The money spent on adaptation planning is money spent well, and I mean, there is nothing else we can do. We just need to go on with adaptation, because climate change is a fact, and it has been increasing in the years. And of course, if you have any questions, I can try to answer to you. If there are other questions that I might not be able to answer to you, then I leave you also the contacts of the City of Padova's Environmental Office in order for you to be able to link, as Georgia said earlier. Thank you.
Thank you very much to our guests. I think this is when we're going to switch back to Hebrew. Just one